Thank you for listening to Depictions Media Radio. Welcome to Policy and Rights, the show about government policy and human rights. Welcome back to Policy and Rights here in Depictions Media Radio. I'm your host, Michael Clogs. In the next segments, we're going to hear from the Russian Federation as they openly accuse the United States of attacks that happened on the Crimean Peninsula. The permanent representative to the UN from the Russian Federation says that they will find evidence that will prove that the United States was definitely behind it, and that Ukraine was along with them in the attacks that injured several civilians and was responsible for 5 deaths in that particular region of the Russian Federation. We are also going to hear from the UN stakeout floor from France, the United Kingdom, and Germany as they are critical of what is happening with Iran and their nuclear power program. They are in fear that the numbers are not matching up and that they could possibly actually be building a nuclear weapons program instead. We also are going to hear from the UN press room as 2 representatives from the World Food Program are going to be speaking about delivering food and food security in Gaza, as with all the fighting and the turmoil that's going on there. So a lot to cover with all that, and we're going to hear some updates from CNN as the Supreme Court of the United States is set to make some as they call it, blockbuster decisions on abortion, guns, and the claims of immunity for the former President Donald Trump, as he has argued that he should be immune to charges, and that without immunity, presidents are hamstrung because they're always fearful of a overzealous prosecutor after leaving the White House. The immunity case appears likely to come down to whether Donald Trump's actions after the 2020 elections were official, or if they were private, which means that the steps he was taking as president, or as he was taking the steps as the private human being, Donald Trump. Extreme weather in North America is having some effects in Minnesota, and there is a dam on the brink of collapse. The Rapid and Dam, located 70 miles southwest of Minneapolis, is in imminent danger. The Blue Earth County government said in a Monday evening update, the county we're not currently planning on mass evacuations, while emergency crews are actively monitoring the situation. Severe flooding in the region near South Dakota has wreaked havoc across the region and killing at least one person and prompting rescue efforts throughout. And from the BBC, this is a human rights thing that in Ukraine on the front lines you have LGBTQ soldiers who are fighting on the front lines to protect their country, and many of whom are involved in same-sex marriages, which same-sex marriages in Ukraine are still said to be illegal. And in the end, when the loved ones of the soldiers are not being informed of, one, of their death, and two, are not giving any type of say in the final interment of their bodies. So, why don't we move forward, and we're going to hear from the stakeout floor, and then we'll actually move into the UN press room, where we'll hear about what is happening with food security with Palestine.
Good afternoon. Today, the Security Council discussed the implementation of UN Security Council Resolution 2231, which underpins the Iran nuclear deal and sets out Iran's nuclear commitments. This resolution is due to terminate in October next year. The next 16 months will therefore be pivotal in finding a diplomatic solution to the Iran nuclear crisis. Very concerningly, the IAEA Director General's recent reports again show that Iran is moving in the wrong direction by continuing to escalate its nuclear activities far beyond the limits of the Iran nuclear deal, the so-called JCPOA. Iran's nuclear advances, some of which are irreversible, have hollowed out the JCPOA and will continue to make a return to a negotiated solution more difficult. Meanwhile, Iranian officials have issued statements about its capacity to assemble a nuclear weapon and the potential change of its so-called doctrine that are explicitly contrary to the Treaty on Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons. The Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency reports that Iran's total stockpiles of enriched uranium now stand at more than 30 times the JCPOA limit. Iran is growing its stockpile of high enriched uranium to levels unprecedented for a state without a nuclear weapons program. Such activity has no credible civilian justification. Most recently, Iran has followed through on installing and operating thousands more advanced centrifuges across multiple sites, including the deep underground facility at Fordow. Under the JCPOA, Iran committed not to install or operate any of these centrifuges and not to use this site for enrichment purposes. We reiterate our call on Iran to cease its ongoing escalation and return to compliance with its JCPOA commitments. Iran's lack of cooperation with the IAEA over many years undermines global non-proliferation. It also prevents the agency from carrying out vital work to assess the Iranian nuclear program. Iran agreements with the IAEA and its legal obligations must be pursued in full without further delay, as repeatedly requested by the Director General and the Board of Governors. It is especially concerning to see Iran flatly deny its legal obligation and under Modified Code 3.1 to declare new nuclear facilities to the IAEA. Our governments have diligently pursued a diplomatic solution to the Iranian nuclear issue over many years and would continue to support diplomatic efforts that ensure Iran never develops a nuclear weapon, but Iran must seriously and urgently honor its commitment to diplomacy and legally binding obligation in the remaining 16 months before the expiry of this resolution. Thank you.
Ambassador.
The permanent representative of the Russian Federation, and he does a stakeout on events that happened in the Crimea Peninsula and as he voices the Russian opinion on the attacks on civilians and civilian sites in that particular region of Crimea.
Thank you very much for coming. Yesterday, on June 23rd, during the Great Orthodox Feast of Pentecost, the Saint Trinity, Kiev regime, supported by the USA, carried out a heinous attack against civilians in the Russian city of Sevastopol in Crimea. Ukraine launched 5 US-supplied Attack-MS missiles armed with cluster munitions. All flight missions were introduced by the US experts based on the US satellite intelligence. An American Global Hawk UAV was patrolling the airspace over the Crimean Peninsula. The beach area, packed with peaceful citizens enjoying their weekend and Orthodox holiday, was hit. Fire came from the sky on unprotected people who had nowhere to hide. Sand turned into blood. The video footage from the scene is just shocking. 151 persons were injured, among them 27 children. 4 people died, including 2 children. They will never have a chance to enjoy a summer day again. The investigative committee of the Russian Federation has started to investigate this heinous crime. All responsible for this and other terrorist attacks will be held accountable. The fact that the US is directly involved in this crime is beyond any doubt. Washington and its allies foster a neo-Nazi regime in Kyiv and encourage their puppets in Kyiv to commit terrorist acts against civilians. Recently, the NATO countries gave the Kyiv regime a green light to conduct strikes deep into the Russian territory. We are not surprised that the Western media keep silent about this tragedy. The lives of the Russian civilians are of no interest to them. The lack of any meaningful response from the UN Secretariat that is supposed to stand against such obvious crimes and violations of international law is even more regretful. It is a clear example of double standards of the UN Secretariat, who is very eloquent on other occasions. But when it comes to the killings of the Russian civilians, the only reaction of the Secretariat was that they, I quote, want all sides to take steps to avoid civilian casualties, unquote. And that they, I quote, seek an end to the war in line with the UN Charter and JA resolutions, end quote. No condemnation, no regret, not even sympathy. And this is not enough. This is an illustration of bias and hypocrisy of the UN Secretariat trying to shy away from calling a spade, that the crimes committed by the Kyiv regime are inadmissible and that the NATO members are an accomplice in these crimes. I will not go into the origins of this crisis or its genesis. We spoke about it many times during the Security Council briefings, who started what and when. I will just give you a few quotes how the Secretariat treats what's happening in Ukraine and how it treats what's happening in Russia. January 16, 23rd. Turning to Ukraine, our colleagues on the ground are telling us that the civilians across the country faced a grim weekend, with airstrikes having killed and injured dozens of civilians. Homes, schools, and hospitals were also damaged in different parts of the country. A strike hit a residential building in Dnipro, on Saturday evening in one of the deadliest attacks in Ukraine since the start of the Russian invasion last February. Then, the Secretary General condemned this attack, saying that was another example of a suspected violation of the laws of the war. The humanitarian coordinator for Ukraine, Denise Brown, condemned the immense civilian toll of the attack by the Russian Federation armed forces and called for an effective investigation of suspected war crimes and appropriate prosecution of suspects. July 23, 23. In a statement we issued yesterday, the Secretary General strongly condemned the Russian missile attack on Odessa. The Secretary General urges the Russian Federation to immediately cease attacks against cultural property protected by widely ratified international normative instruments. March 22, 24. The Secretary General condemns in the strongest terms today's large-scale missile and drone attacks by the Russian Federation on Ukrainian cities and towns across the country. They are unacceptable and must end immediately. March 10, 24. The UN team knows that Russia's ongoing invasion has caused immense human suffering and widespread devastation. May 23, 24. And staying on Ukraine, today in Ukraine, Denise Brown, whom you know, leads the UN's effort in Ukraine, condemned the deadly attacks on Kharkiv city, which follows 2 weeks of attacks on the region. And when it happens in Russia, listen to this, February 15, 24. We have also seen reports of missile strikes on the Russian city of Belgorod. And we reiterate one more time that attacks against civilians and civilian infrastructure are prohibited under international humanitarian law, are unacceptable, must stop immediately. April 13, 24. We have no particular details of this, but we've seen the reports. That's about the Palestinian journalists. April 16, 24. The IAEA has a very clear and technical mandate, right? It is one on having to do with nuclear power plants and nuclear energy. The inspectors have a role there. We do not have the forensic capability of reporting on these strikes, nor does the IAEA. We do not have the forensic capability, nor do we have the investigatory mandate of that bit. April 2024, on killing of the Russian NTV station journalist. We stand opposed to all attacks on media, wherever they are. Media need to be free to go about their work without harm done to them or any other hindrance. And finally, June 22, 24 on Sevastopol. We want all sides to take steps to avoid civilian casualties. As always, we see an end to the war in line with the UN Charter and GA resolutions. I hope you notice the difference in the tone and the way the events are being presented by the Secretary. The US ambassador in Moscow was called today to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for a démarche on this abhorrent crime where Washington is directly involved, not only by supplying the missiles, but also fully controlling their flight missions. The strike targeting civilians in Sevastopol will not go unanswered. There will be measures in response. The Russian Federation will continue to protect its people and its national security until no threat is posed by the neo-Nazi regime in Kiev that was breeded, raised and financed by the West. 24th June is the mourning day in the city of Sevastopol. We mourn together with the Sevastopol and its people. Our sympathy goes to the families of the victims. We wish a speedy recovery to the injured. I thank you. Yes, Eddie.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. The Secretary General has repeatedly accused the Russian Federation of violating the United Nations Charter by invading Ukraine in February 2022. So my question is, how do you respond to that, and how concerned are you that this latest escalation could lead to a much wider conflict, as some analysts have been worrying about?
We've been explaining the reasons why we started the special military operation many times over, and we were saying many times over that the conflict didn't start in February 2022. The conflict started much earlier. It started 2014 with the neo-Nazi coup d'etat in Kiev, and with Ukraine conducting a so-called anti-terrorist operation against their own population in Donbass. They were shelling Donbass for 8 years without the tacit approval of their Western sponsors. Nobody cared at all what was happening. Finally, when we decided to put an end to it, everybody went out to speak. So, as many times as we said, and I will repeat it, we didn't start this war, we came to end it. What regards the potential escalation of the crisis, yes, we hear what is being said in the West. Recent actions by the West when they permitted Kiev to attack targets inside the Russian territory, their missions, their personnel, including military personnel, that is helping in directing Ukrainians in operating their weapon systems that they supply. These are steps that definitely lead to the escalation. They talk about Russia preparing to invade Western Europe, which is, of course, complete nonsense. So it's not us who is escalating. You know that President Putin came up with an initiative based on the realities that are today on the ground. It was flatly rejected by the Western Ukrainians. But the further the conflict goes, the worse conditions that we offer will be for the Ukrainians. They have to realize it. Them and the West, their sponsors.
Mr. Ambassador, thank you for the briefing. Gabriel Elizondo from Al Jazeera English. Mr. Ambassador, what are you hoping after Sunday's attack will happen at the Security Council? Are you hoping to take something to the Security Council, and what action would you ideally like to see? You mean
on the Sevastopol attack?
Yes, sir.
I think that will be raised during another regular briefing on Ukraine that will definitely follow in July, like we do every month. You know that our policy is that if our former Western friends request for a meeting, we do reciprocate. But we will not hesitate to speak about what is happening, either done by the Kiev regime sponsored by the West, or by what they are doing now in the financial area, trying to steal Russian money and give it to Kiev, which is a complete shame from the countries that proclaim to be the guardians of international law.
I'm waiting for the microphone. So, Ambassador, you particularly mentioned that it's U.S.-supplied weapons that lead to the deaths of 5 civilians. Have you talked to your U.S. counterpart on this, and what do you think of the supply of weapons to Ukraine would do to the whole crisis in Ukraine?
It will definitely not help in ending the crisis. The more weapons they supply, the stronger the response will be. No F-16s will help the Ukrainians like they are hoping for, like all those Leopards, Abrams tanks, and whatever never helped them, because most of them, those that went to the battlefield, remained there forever.
Have you talked to your U.S. counterpart on this issue?
We are talking during the briefings, but I don't think they are receptive. They continue with their own mantras about what is happening without trying to analyze deeper.
What about the accusation from your Western colleagues on the supply of DPRK weapons?
We commented it many times. They never provided any material evidence. They just talk about it.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. I have 2 questions. First, about the double standard.
The
double standard. Do you see the same double standard in Gaza? When one Palestinian attack an Israeli, then they condemn with the strongest term. When a whole population is being obliterated, then they are careful, they express concern, Even the SG today called only for humanitarian ceasefire. He still did not call for full-fledged, comprehensive ceasefire.
And that's
Do you see that double standard?
Of course, these are clear double standards which all the world's view and watch live in the Security Council. That for us, that's been obvious, not even with the start of the crisis in Gaza, but with other crises that happened before it as well, Ukraine including.
My second question, do you see that the war in Gaza and the war in Ukraine is a similar battle, and if the West, US-led hegemony, could come to an end if they lose both battles in Gaza and in Ukraine?
They are similar in the sense that they are both about U.S. hegemony, yes, indeed. But they differ in nature, in genesis, and I wouldn't compare what's happening in the conflict in Ukraine with what's happening in Gaza. As you rightly said, the whole people is being obliterated, and that's clear to everyone who watches it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. I am from Ukrainian News Agency.
I know.
We know that the purpose of the special military operation is killing, raping, and pillage. Do you think, does Russia succeed in fulfilling these aims?
That's for you to consider. Let's see where the front is regarding raping, killing, abducting, which is another favorite theme from our Western and Ukrainian colleagues. This is not just a war on the battlefield. This is mainly an information war, and this war, of course, the West and Ukraine is winning so far with the help of the West. But you have to recognize that we do not deliberately target any civilian infrastructure in Ukraine. Only that infrastructure that relates to the military-industrial complex of Ukraine. We do not bomb cities. We do not bomb civilians. So that's it. We are not doing what Israel is doing in Gaza.
The U.S. announcing this afternoon they were going to send another I want to get your reaction to the U.S. announcing they're going to send another $150 million worth of munitions to Ukraine to fight Russia. Could I get your reaction to that?
If I've correctly understood you, you're asking me about the reaction to another tranche of assistance that goes to Ukraine, right? Correct?
The U.S. is sending more money for munitions to Ukraine. I want to get your reaction to that.
Yes.
The U.S. is sending $150 million more in munitions to Ukraine to help fight Russia. What is your reaction to that?
The reaction was always similar. As many as they sent, that won't help it on the battlefield. And it is being proved by what is happening on the ground. You see it yourself. Thank you very much. We'll go to...
Okay, we're going to go to the UN press room as we hear from experts on food security in Gaza.
It's online.
Yes, we do. We have both of them.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Good morning, everybody. Hello. So today, our noon briefing will start with Mr. Maximo Terrero, Chief Economist of the Food and Agriculture Organization, and Mr. Arif Hossein, Chief Economist of the World Food Programme. They will brief, as you can see virtually, on the latest Integrated Food Security Phase Classification IPC update on Gaza. Mr. Terrero, would you like to start?
Thank you. Thank you so much. So what we are going to present today is the latest IPC multi-partner analysis that was conducted from 27th of May to 4th of June, 2024, and followed by a review by the IPC Famine Review Committee. This analysis factors in all the data and information available up to the 4th of June of 2024, and does not take into account the latest developments on the ground. Let me go through the key findings of this report, and for sure Arif will go deeper in some of this. First, the IPC Acute Food Insecurity Analysis, conducted by a multi-agency, multi-sector analysis team in February 2024, released in March, projected that famine will likely occur in the northern governorates by the end of May, if an immediate cessation of hostilities and sustained access for provision of essential supplies and services to the population did not take place. Following this analysis, several important developments occurred. In contrast with the assumptions made for the projection period in the previous analysis from March to July of 2024, the amount of food deliveries and nutrition services provided to the northern governorates increased, and this appeared to have temporarily alleviated conditions in the northern governorates, and in this context, available evidence does not indicate that the famine is currently occurring. In the southern governorates, the situation deteriorated following the renewal of hostilities in early May. A high and sustained risk of famine persists, so that's very important to underline, across the whole Gaza Strip as long as conflict continues and humanitarian access is restricted. Given the unpredictability of the ongoing conflict and humanitarian access challenges, any significant change may lead to a very rapid deterioration into famine. While the whole territory is classified in emergency, this means IPC Phase 4, latest IPC findings show that around 495,000 people are still facing catastrophic levels of acute food insecurity. This is IPC 5 through September 2024. This represents 22% of the population of the Gaza Strip, or 1 in 5 Gazians. Another 745,000 people, 33%, face emergency conditions. This is IPC 4. The latest data show that on a regular basis, more than half of the population does not have any food to eat in the house, and over 20% going entire days and nights without eating. When we look within the territories, if we focus on the North Gaza and Gaza Governorate, in North Gaza and Gaza Governorate, 75,000 people, 25% of the population are in IPC 5, catastrophe, and 150,000 people, 50% of the population, are in IPC 4, emergency. In the Southern Governorates and Rafah, in Deir al-Balah and Kanjoni Governorates, over 350,000 people, 20% of the population, are in IPC 5, catastrophe, and around 525,000 people, 30% of the population, are in IPC 4, emergency. In Rafah Governorate, 70,000 people, 35% of the population, are in IPC 5, and 70,000 people, 35% of the population, are in IPC 4. So what we are observing is that we have still an extremely risk of famine, and over the 8 months of the relentless hostilities, characterized by bombardment and ground operations and the besiegement of the entire population, have led to these devastating consequences in the Gaza Strip. So it's extremely important that this is stopped, and it's extremely important that food access continues to accelerate to avoid these risks becoming a reality. Thank you.
Thank you. Arif, would you like to take the floor?
Thank you very much. So let me just continue from there. One of the very, very key messages of this report is that as long as there is continuation of hostilities, as long as there are restrictions on access, the risk of famine for the entire Gaza Strip remains real and remains highly significant. That's the biggest message which is coming out. The second thing I would encourage people to look at the FRC report in whole, because basically what it does is it goes through different elements of food security, meaning it talks about availability of food. And on the availability of food, it talks about how the agricultural systems, which are supposed to produce food, a vast majority of them are destroyed, how the livestock systems are destroyed. And then it also talks about the second part of getting food in, which is through commercial and through markets. And it talks about how food may be available, but it is really expensive. It is out of reach for many, many people across Gaza, basically. And then it also talks about access, both physical access and economic access. In the sense of physical access, what that means is that are people able to produce their food? Well, not really, because they cannot go out or they're not in their places because they've been displaced. Or can they go to markets? That could be another problem. But also economic access, meaning do you have the money? Even if the food is available, do you have the money to actually buy that? And it looks at the flows of, how much money, like ATMs, how many banks are working. And those numbers are, in like less than 10% type of levels, both for ATMs, which are functioning, but also for the banks, which are functioning, but also are remittances coming in, and at what level are they coming in? So you look at, like I said, you look at it from the availability side, we have an issue. You look at it from the access side, you have an issue. Then the third part becomes about utilization. How are people using this food? Do they have what it takes to have decent food? Whether it is utensils, whether it's energy, whether it's fuel, no. So then we get into the fourth part, which is called about stabilization, because food is not about 1 day or 2 days. And over there also, obviously, the last thing there is stability. So when you look at it from all of these angles, what you find is that the conclusion that yes, famine remains a significant and elevated risk. It should not surprise anybody. That's one. The second thing I think which is very clear is that this, especially looking from March analysis to today, is that what improved situations was our access. More commercial was coming in. Let's say if you're looking after March and April, after the report came in, there was and also non-food items had started coming in. So very quickly we started to see an improvement. And past May 7th, that has started to go down in the north, but more importantly now in the south. So that's a very big issue. So bottom line over there is that if we have access, and in places where we have access, we can improve the situation. But if we don't have access, then it is not possible. Other thing which the report talks about is the necessity of multi-sectoral action. And over there, it is not, food is very important, but so is clean water, so is wash, so is sanitation. And this is becoming more and more important as people have been now displaced in the south from Rafah to the center. And we are talking about almost 1.82 million people in a very small area. I think the FRC report says that it is kind of like 28,000 people in a square kilometer, something like that. And what does that do? That makes things even more difficult in the sense of health, disease outbreaks, sanitation. And this is something which we are dealing with. Now, one other thing I wanted to, which comes out of the report, and I think the FRC team makes a very big point, is that almost saying that whether it is classified as a famine or not is declared as a famine or not is not the point, because without that declaration, things are so very bad. And I just wanted to give you an example to make that point, that if you look back in 2011, the big famine in Somalia, where 258,000 people died, half of those people died before famine was declared. So it is not to say that, okay, yeah, there is a famine, now let's act. We must act and continue to act to avert a famine. And that will only happen if, number one, there is cessation of hostilities, there is a ceasefire. 2, we have access from the borders on the northern side, so commodities can come in. And 3, because it requires a multi-sectoral approach, because it is beyond just food, it needs everybody. So WFP alone cannot do it. It is WFP and partners who all must have access to do what needs to be done on the ground to make sure that we continue to keep people alive. And the very last thing I wanted to say was that in order to have an effective response, 3 things are a must. Number 1, we should have enough commodities, whether commercial, whether humanitarian, coming into Gaza Strip. Number 2, people who are bringing this stuff must be safe. And number 3, people who are receiving these things need to be safe. And if we can make sure of those 3 things, which I don't know how you can do without a ceasefire, then we can improve the situation. Otherwise, it is very difficult. Stop here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. We'll turn into questions. Let's start with Gabriel, Al Jazeera.
Hi, this is Gabriel Elizondo from Al Jazeera English. Thank you very much for your briefing. You both talked about improved access. In the north, in the report, it says there was some improved access, and that staved off a potential famine. Does that indicate that the Israeli authorities have the ability to help in this situation if they so choose? Do you see it that way, or can you elaborate?
So what has happened in the northern territories, as you correctly pointed out, and is in the report, is that there has been a significant increase of access to food and permits to be able to move commercial food. Now, we must understand that this population, the affected population, is a population that before the war happening was in very good conditions of health. And that allows them to recover very quickly if they have access to these resources of food and water, as Arif was saying, all the different elements that are required. And that's why they improve so quickly. If we were in another context where this population started being vulnerable, like we have in other countries in Africa, then this will have taken significantly longer time. So that's important. And for sure, of course, as we are saying, if the conflict stops and there is a law of humanitarian and commercial food to flow, then of course the improvement will happen as we have observed. But that does not mean that we have 96% of the population of the Gaza Strip in IPC4. That's 21.5 million people. No? So we shouldn't forget that.
Thank you. ED, AP?
Thank you very much on behalf of the United Nations Correspondents Association for doing this briefing. My name is Edith Lederer from the Associated Press. 2 questions. First, can you give us an update on what's happening with the aid coming off the U.S. piers? WFP had been in charge of logistics. Is any of it getting delivered? We know that there's a review going on. And secondly, there are reports that Israel has been told that the UN will suspend aid operations across Gaza unless urgent steps are taken to better protect humanitarian workers. Is that something that WFP endorses? Thank you.
So on the first question, I think what is really important to note is that anything which allows us to bring in more essential commodities, more food, that's welcome. But that also means that those systems, they need to pass the security tests. And for the UN, as you know, this is UNDSS, and there is an assessment which is going on right now to make sure that it is doable and it is secure. And as soon as that is done, I mean, we would welcome the opportunity to use that facility, use that jail. Now, the from my executive director, from Secretary General, from everybody, I mean, safety and security of our staff is paramount. That's the first thing. So we will always take that first and foremost in anything that we do.
Thank you so much. Pamela, please go ahead.
Thank you to both Mr. Terrero and Mr. Hussein. It's Pamela Falk. My question is a follow-up to Edie's. Could you tell us more about the floating pier possibility or past aid? It was damaged by weather, but then it was reported to have been repaired. Is it in a position to actually take in aid if all the checks that you mentioned are cleared? Thank you.
I think I think as soon as it is cleared, and clearance from the security side, but also as soon as it's ready and the security is cleared, obviously we have no objections to using that. And like I said, again, anything which allows us to increase the flow of critical humanitarian commodities into the Gaza Strip is more than welcome.
But just a clarification, I haven't seen, maybe it's out there, is it actually functioning right now?
As far as I know, is that there were problems with it a couple of times, and then it is ready to be used, but it has to go through the security side.
So nothing
exactly what it is.
So nothing has been delivered from that yet, correct?
No, okay. No, not right now. No.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, Deji, please go ahead.
Yes, Shudoju with China Central Television. I just read the report. It seems the truckloads, the flow of aids get into Gaza Strip increased a little bit. But if we break down to months, you'll discover that in May or early June, the number actually dropped dramatically. I just want to know, what is the trajectory you think this situation of the food security would be in Gaza Strip? And another thing I was wondering is, we know that our spokesperson here actually mentioned many times that there's a collapse of social order in Gaza Strip. How much time do you think would need to restore the social order so that to really deliver those humanitarian aids to people who need those things?
Let me start, Arif, if you're okay, and then you. So on the first question, I think what is important of this report is that it clearly shows that if there is an improvement in the flow and access to all this food and water and so on, the returns are important and the risks are minimized of a famine. I think that's crucial. Now, that tells us that this can happen and can be done, and therefore we can reduce the current sustained risk of famine, which still persists and is significant in the location. The trajectory has variance, it's not stable, and that variability is a control variability depending on the level of permits and the level of access of trucks to the location. And that's what we need to minimize. And the hope is that we can have a positive trend of that will imply, of course, also the security attached to that. And also on the second part, especially in the northern Gaza, the ground operations continue with high intensity, and attacks in Jabalia and city and camp continue to be important, which is displacing more people. As long as this continues, of course, this will exacerbate the social situation and could increase risks. But the evidence that this report is bringing up is telling us that this is very possible to improve. And that's why this has to become a positive trend of access to these needed resources.
Arif, did you want to come in?
Yeah, basically what I would say is that you have, there's no doubt that the humanitarian space in Gaza Strip, it continues to shrink. And that means that our ability to deliver safely and security also is shrinking. Now, the point is that if it continues this way, then the gains that we have seen past April, in April, they will be quickly reversed. And I think this is something which we need to know. From WFP side of things, we are assisting about 1 million people, but at the same time, we have stocks for about 5 to 7 days if they are not replenished. So we have fuel stocks for even lesser time. So this replenishment, this continuation of food and essential commodities coming in through the South is highly critical. It's really important for continuation of the operations.
Thank you. Mike, please go ahead.
Thanks so much. Thank you, gentlemen, for doing this briefing. It's Mike Wagon. I'm from I-24 News. I wanted to ask you here, according to the IPC's own definitions, in order to project famine with reasonable evidence, you've got to meet 3 different benchmarks. And the IPC in this latest report actually removed its projections with reasonable evidence that there is going to be famine in Gaza at phase 5 and phase 4 levels. At least 2 of those 3 benchmarks are nowhere close to being met, and I couldn't quite determine from what I've seen so far about the 3rd one. Why, with the IPC removing with reasonable evidence its projection for famine, and with the previous projections for famine being so far off the mark that we continue to hear from the IPC and from UN organizations more projections for famine? Why is that?
No, so let me be very careful on what is happening. So when they do this analysis and they have this criteria, of course, that has to be met, their projections is based on the assumptions that the situation was going to continue as it was. So ceteris paribus, the point where there was no flow of food and availability of food in the location. As a result of that, the projection comes out and says there is a famine that could happen in this month to this month. What is happening right now is that realization didn't happen because there was significant change in the availability and access to food in the northern part. But what is still there is that you have a whole population in IPC4, which is before IPC5, which is the famine. And that's why the report is clearly stating, it's not stating a famine, it's stating a high risk and sustained risk of famine persist across the whole Gaza Strip as long as the conflict continues and humanitarian access is restricted. If tomorrow the humanitarian access is blocked, we will go back to the same situation as before, and the projections will be different. So again, it's very important to differentiate the assumptions that you have in a point in time and the data that is being procured today, which is telling us that that is not happening, but there is significant risk and sustained risk of famine to persist.
So I appreciate that. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Mr. Hussein. I'm sorry.
No. Basically, what I was going to say is that, Massimo is absolutely right in terms of it is about what is the likelihood of assumptions going forward. But also, one other thing which is important to note here is that, the same systems which back in February told us that the situation was getting extremely bad on the food security side in particular, but also on the nutrition side from whatever data was generated. The very same methods of data collection and analysis also told us that the situation improved. So that should give us a little bit more confidence in terms of the methods. It's not skewed just one side. It shows you when there is a deterioration in the situation, and it also shows you when there is an improvement in the situation. And our job as analysts basically is to make sure that we report accordingly, whether it is on the food security side, whether it is in terms of people's consumption, in terms of people's coping, whether it is in terms of how markets are performing, whether what is happening with the prices. And the very last thing is that these are all dynamic things. I mean, food security by definition is dynamic, which means what is happening today may be different than tomorrow, and what is happening tomorrow may be different than day after, or maybe different on day after tomorrow, depending on what happened. But the underlying causes, this is why it is so important to say that, okay, what are the root causes down here? Well, one is the conflict, and two, it is access. So as long as those underlying causes are there, you're going to continue to see the movement or fluctuations in these things, depending on the intensity of the conflict, depending on how much access is there. So it is not that surprising.
So one simple follow-up and one lengthier follow-up. The IPC report, I think it was the last one, noted that there were 32, I think, reported deaths in March due to malnutrition or starvation, and one in April. Do you have a total number of deaths that have been reported in Gaza during the war as a result of starvation or malnutrition combined with disease? Are those figures available anywhere? They're not available anywhere?
No, I don't think it's even a matter of being available. I don't think that they are even collected. For example, if you look at the mortality figures in IPC, it is not mortality as in any mortality, right? It is mortality which is related to hunger, disease, hunger-related cause mortality. So in the data which was being collected previously, that did not differentiate between the two. The last CATI survey, which was done, there is a sample on that in which basically we have tried to look at a recall. I don't know exactly the length of the recall in terms of both differentiating both trauma and non-trauma deaths, hunger-related deaths, and when you look at that information, and this is in the FRC report, you will see that indicator has not been met. It is for adults is 2 per 10,000 per day, and for children is 4 per 10,000 per day. And frankly, it's neither one has been met, non-trauma. And I think that's one side. So there's no mortality data regularly collected. The same thing on the nutrition side, but a little bit different. Because of what is happening, it is not like, you can go out there and you can do a nutrition surveys and all of that. So where the nutrition information is coming in from, that's from the MUAC, which is done associated with when you go and you do immunization of children, they also collect the MUAC data. Over there also it showed, what it showed in February, March was very close to famine thresholds. And by the way, over there at that time, the sample which was used was 2 years, 0 to 2 years, and this time up to children up to 5 years. So as space is there, or as we can, whatever we can do, it is being done. But remember, this is in the conflict zones, right? So even if we need to, methods like IPC, which has been in practice since last 20 years, is kind of designed to keep that also in mind. This is why what you see is that whenever there is some risk of famine or something like that, famine review committee is involved. And the idea of that is that for somebody, independent people, experts in the field, whether it's mortality, whether it's nutrition, whether it's food security, to actually look at that data and look at the modeling and basically say if it makes sense or not. And say whether something is plausible or not. So look, I mean, I'm emphasizing this because it's not an easy environment to do all of this. It's not like you can go and do a full food security assessment and say, let's go do a full nutrition survey or let's do a mortality survey. So given the circumstances, what is it that you can do the best? And this is why we say that in these type of environments, IPC is the gold standard.
Thank you. I'll come back to you, Mike. Abdelhamid.
Thank you, Sir Abdelhamid Sayam from the Arabic Daily Al-Quds Al-Arabi. So you are saying there is a real threat of famine of about 500,000 people in northern Gaza, and the distribution of humanitarian aid is very limited, and the inflow of the humanitarian supplies are very limited. So do you see that in the near future we will witness mass death of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians if this situation sustained?
So, Masme, if you might,
go ahead.
When we were sitting in February, we had a situation, very, very difficult situation, and we did an analysis. And out of that analysis, one of the outcomes was basically that famine is imminent by the end of May if A, B, and C does not happen, right? Right now, and then after that, what we saw that, there was more assistance which came in, especially in the north, and we started to see improvements. Right now, what is happening is that we are worried that the situation in the south is looking like that, and in the center is looking like that. And what we need to make sure, this is why we're here, we need to make sure that enough multi-sectoral commodities, and why I'm saying not food and multi-sectoral is because you need food, but you need water, you need health, you need medicine, you need, sanitation. All of that to come in for us to hopefully once again avert a famine-like situation or creation of a famine-like situation. That is the purpose. And the risk right now is that there are almost 2 million people congested in one place and in a very small place. People are talking about switch in terms of, running. People are talking about, in terms of coping, I didn't get into this, but, people selling their clothes to buy food. People collecting trash to get money to buy food and other essentials. So it is a very, very difficult situation. And our job is to make sure that we make everybody aware that it is a difficult situation. But if we do something about this right now, we can avert that. And how that can happen is ceasefire and our ability to get into these places with the right type of commodities, with the right type of help, so we can start to reverse this damage.
So let me add, the question is very simple, no? So we have more than half of the population that does not have today food to eat in the house, and over 20% go entire days and nights without eating. Now, what we are seeing in the northern part in this report is that there has been an improvement of mobility and access to food and to wash and so on. And that has created an immediate result because of the good initial condition that these people have. We also have 495,000 people still facing IPC5. So the solution is simple. This can be resolved if we do what Arif was saying, and can have a significant impact if we follow the stop of the conflict and give access to what is needed in terms of food, wash, and other important issues that are relevant to this multi-sectoral approach. So that's, for me, the most important message here. We shouldn't be discussing what could happen if. I think it's clear that an improvement can happen if things change today and we stop this and we allow to deliver food and know what is needed to this population.
Can I follow up?
Okay, one quick follow-up, and then we go back to Mike.
Thank you. I don't know how things will improve when there is one side determined to continue with this battle to the very end, even if every Palestinian in Gaza is killed. But I want to ask you about the breakdown of law and order. And Mr. Winsland spoke about some Palestinians were killed by mobs. But whom to blame? Why these things happen? You probably know the people of Gaza. Have you witnessed any kind of aggressive behavior from the people in Gaza before, and why this is developing now? Thank you.
So if you destroy all the environment of operation, if you don't have access to food, you're putting people in extreme critical situations, and that's what we need to avoid. And I think what we are observing is an extremely extreme situation where people are pushed to an extreme negative environment that is putting their lives at risk. And that's what needs to be resolved now. And I think that's what is important.
Thank you. Let's go back to Mike.
I'm willing to defer if somebody else has a first question. No? Okay.
If anybody else has a question, otherwise, Mike, please go ahead.
A question for you. UNRWA had taken their data offline a few days ago, but last they had online, on June 18th, there were 47 aid trucks in a row that were marked as looted. 47 in a row would seem like a concerted, coordinated effort of some sort to loot those trucks along the same route. Have you seen any coordinated effort, whether it's among armed gangs or other organizations, to loot those trucks, or is this an organic effort of desperate individual Gazans to loot 47 aid trucks in a row?
So, I think I have not heard of anything which is organized or this is something happened. This is you have desperate people who are doing in desperate times. They are doing desperate things, and but from what I know, I don't know, so I cannot say after that. I'll stop here.
Thank you so much. Does anybody else have a question?
Final thoughts, and this is a bit of a personal rant with Donald Trump. If Donald Trump truly respected the Oval Office and the position that being Commander-in-Chief of the United States, if he truly respected it, until all of these legal things were cleared up, he would step away from running for office. He would step away out of respect for the country and the Constitution that the presidency represents. That he would, out of respect for the citizens of the United States, not continue to run for office even though it is causing turmoil. He isn't the first president to run into legal trouble. Matter of fact, Joe Biden with his son, there have been some questions about that. And what, as president, what will Joe Biden do to protect his son? And in the end, it's turned out that even with Hunter Biden losing, or at least having his legal license as a lawyer suspended because of a felony conviction, he is not protecting his son. He is allowing his son to go through the legal system as though he were any other citizen. He is not using the executive office to try to influence or curb the consequences that his son is going through for his actions. There's something to be said for that. If you are in an office like that, you should have respect for the people that you represent, the people that you are working for. I think that Mr. Trump has forgotten the fact that he will, as president, he is working for the people of the United States. They are not working for him. Something to consider as there's an election going on. And something to think about. And moving on to, I do have some comments on the rights of the loved ones of the soldiers who have fallen, even though they're gay, that in the end we should respect their wishes. We should respect how they have lived. They gave the ultimate sacrifice in protecting their country, and that says something in of itself. So why not inform the loved ones, no matter who they are, and allow them to intern their loved one and grieve openly and freely. Thank you for listening to Policy and Rights. I've been your host, Michael Clogs, and please find that subscribe button wherever it is so we can help spread the love around the world and create a more wonderful place to live. This show has been produced by Depictions Media. Please contact us at depictions.media for more information.